people need some protection for their immune system. It's nice to give it in the mouth. You just spray a couple of sprays of the immunity boost, just like this, and you're done. It's bright blue, which is kind of surprising in a way because people who have grown up perhaps using spirulina in their smoothies are used to it having kind of a green color. So why do you think this difference exists specifically in our spirulina, and that produced at Vaxa Technologies and used in the Orlo product?
Actually, controlling the growth conditions, mainly light conditions. As I mentioned before, they trigger different metabolic pathways, and the algae that we cultivate in Iceland has an extreme amount of blue antioxidant, which is called phycocyanin. It's allowed to be used as food colorant, by the way, so there's nothing bad about it. It's FDA approved, but yeah, it's very rich, and this presence is very interesting. So I gave a talk the other day, and I ended my talk at I told them, listen, the user experience is very important, and I had a glass of milk with a spirulina, so it looked very blue. It looked like a sky blue paint or something. And I said, you must be wondering how this tastes like, so you're all invited to taste it. And I had little cups of like different thing, and people just could not believe, because when it's blue, it's kind of almost like unnatural. You're not used to eating blue food, so your mouth is looking for this weird taste. You're expecting something weird, but there is none. So it's a typical face of what's going on. Oh my God! Like, I've seen this face a million times, of like the surprise that it actually has no taste.
Welcome to Nutrition Without Compromise, a podcast brought to you by Orlo Nutrition. We believe that nutrition shouldn't be an either or, that you should never have to sacrifice your morals for your health or that of our home planet. Join natural products veteran Corina Belizzi and experts from around the globe as they discuss healthy solutions that are better for you and better for the planet.
Welcome to another interview episode of Nutrition Without Compromise. I'm your host, Corina Belizzi. We are in for a real treat today as we get to know the founder and CTO of Vaxa Technologies, Professor Isaac Berzin. He was named one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine for his work in sustainability and climate change. Isaac is an affiliated scientist at MIT, where he worked on a NASA-sponsored project developing bioreactors for the International Space Station. His innovative work in sustainable algae cultivation has won numerous awards, including the Frost & Sullivan Award, Platts Global Energy Award, and the American Society of Competitiveness Award, an honor bestowed upon him 3 years in a row. And beyond that, before I knew Isaac, I knew of him. People I respected called him a rock star in the world of algae. And while he might dismiss the association, I think it holds true. You see, rarely do you find someone who is quite as brilliant with a scientific mind and who also can command attention on stage. He's demonstrated that ability with his own TED Talk, and he has inspired so very many who work in the algae space, myself included. Professor Isaac Berzin, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Corina.
Now, I don't know that I've ever asked this, as we always just dig straight into algae science when we get a chance to connect. But I would love to know what first drew you to working with algae.
Yeah, actually, I fell in love with algae during my years at MIT. I was cultivating microalgae for the International Space Station, and getting to know them and how amazing they are. It was clear to me how vital they are for our survival on this planet. Nevertheless, algae was not something you associated with something on your plate.
Mm.
Algae was not something associated with large-scale production of a sort. So I thought, what a wonderful challenge. People usually say that the oceans are the lungs of this planet, right?
Mm.
Well, the reason they are the lungs of the planet is they're full of microalgae. That's why. And I have to tell you, after I started with no white hair, and hopefully some wisdom accumulated with the white hair, and my love and appreciation for algae only grew during those years.
Well, I have to tell you, I had the pleasure of going on a sail in the Santa Cruz Bay this earlier this week for a friend's birthday. And, one of the first things that she said as we got out to sea was, "Gosh, I just love this smell, that fresh sea air smell." And a lot of that comes from the seaweed, the microalgae, the life that is so abundant here in the Monterey Bay area. And I think people automatically, when they think of algae, if they haven't been apprised of all the different species of algae, of the fact that even seaweed is a macroalgae, that we get
Correct.
half of our oxygen or even more of our oxygen specifically from the algae growing around the planet, that they really just don't kind of build that association. They think more of it as, I don't know, the fish tanks that they might have at home and having to
Oh,
clean it
yeah.
for the algae.
It's true. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Algae, they just don't have a good PR agency. So I'll give you an example. If you grab semi-intelligent people, okay, in the mall, let's say, and ask them, tell me, where does omega-3 come from? They're going to tell you the fish. It's coming from
Right.
the fish. And then when you ask them what's producing oxygen on the planet, they're going to tell you the rainforests in Brazil. And
Yeah, the
then you're going to
trees.
ask them the trees. And then you're going to ask them what's petroleum, the thing we found in the ground. They're going to say, oh, that what used to be dinosaurs. Well, the answer to all these questions is mainly algae. Mainly algae produce oxygen. Algae are the natural source of omega-3, and petroleum is actually ancient algae. So they're so vital to our life on this planet, but no one knows. It's going to be top secret. So I'm happy we're having this talk, Corina. We're going to promote algae.
Well, to make it cool, like the rock star that you are. Because
Thank you.
ultimately, as we think about these algae strains too, one of the things I hearken back to and that I find just so fascinating about algae is that really we're talking about the start of life on this planet. The first microalgae existed billions of years ago, just as life was beginning to emerge. And so, without these building blocks, we wouldn't have life on this planet the way we do today. So, even thinking about algae as potentially a part of the solution for climate collapse, honestly, it feels like a natural thing, like something we should look to. So I wanted to dig in a little bit into the work that you're doing to grow algae for human and animal nutrition from aquaculture and beyond. What do you find most exciting these days about working with algae?
I would say two things. One is the way I look at it. It's a perfect platform from impact nutrition, and I will elaborate in a minute what I mean. And the second thing is it's kind of an evolutionary step that we are in the middle of taking. I'll explain both. Okay. So the reason I think it's such a wonderful platform for impact nutrition is, think about the food we eat. Everything we eat is light associated. I will explain. Okay. Of course, when you eat a lettuce, it came from photosynthesis. That's easy. But when you eat your steak, how come it's connected to the light? Well, the cow ate the grass that was grown because of photosynthesis, right? So photosynthesis and light is a key. And we as humans, we just kind of tailored kind of photosynthesis to create things or foods. We call it agriculture. But if you think about this agriculture, you take all this light, you take fertilizers, you take fresh water, all these things, and you cultivate biomass. Okay, now here's a question, Karina. Let's say corn or soybean. What percentage of the biomass is the roots, the stems, the leaves, the bean, everything included, okay? What percentage of the biomass you're actually eating? And the answer is single digit. It's crazy. So you invested all these efforts, all this light, and you actually throwing to the garbage. You could mostly grow garbage. Okay, so in a way, we live like pigs. Okay, nevertheless, if you look at microalgae, it's a basket of complete nutrition. There's no waste in algae.
Yeah, let's
There's
talk
no
about this for a
stems.
moment because I think most
Yeah,
people might not understand. If you're talking about the growth of a plant, you're talking about its root system, you're talking about its cellulose, you're talking the cellulose that
yeah,
doesn't give you any nutritional real
yeah,
value in the
yeah.
end. It
It's the
doesn't give you
agricultural
calories that you
waste.
need.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, and so
yeah.
all
So
of
think about the
these.
corn. What do you eat from
Mhm.
the core plant? Only the green stuff, right? The yellow stuff, right? That's the only thing you.
Yeah,
But think about
the
all the
seed.
green matter. The
Mhm,
seeds, only the seeds. So all this green matter and the cup itself and everything else is waste in a way.
mhm.
What an efficient way to cultivate food. What a wasteful way to cultivate food. It was only affordable because we had a lot of land and a lot of water and not a lot of people.
And a lot of subsidies.
Now,
Let's be real there
and a
too.
lot of subsidies. Yeah. So if you think about efficiency and using natural resources in an efficient way, algae present quite an interesting option, especially because they also produce things that they're the prime producers of. For example, essential amino acids. Essential meaning your body cannot produce it, you have to get it from an external source. Essential fatty acids like omega-3s, vitamins and minerals, which are highly bioavailable, they're all produced by algae. They're accumulated up the food chain. Okay, and that's where we usually get it from. But the original, the organism that made the molecule is the algae. So I think that's why it's a wonderful platform for impact nutrition. Uh, and the second point I made was it's like an evolutionary step. So think about us, thousands of years ago, we were all hunter gatherers, and then we made an evolutionary step into farming, right? Which brought a lot of confidence in the food chain, etc., etc. So I have a question: what are we in terms of omega-3? We're mostly still stuck in the hunter and gatherers, right? We hunt the fish and then we squeeze the oil out of them. It's ridiculous. Okay, so I think it's a good time to make this evolutionary step and to move into algae cultivation, and there's a huge benefit in this to the environment, but also to you. Okay, the source is clean and transparent, and I think it's a win-win situation. Really is.
I was asked a question on another podcast I guested on just yesterday, called Whole Earth Radio with Rob Seaman. And he asked me, is fish sustainable? And for me, I found the question hard to answer for a couple of reasons. For one, I spent a decade building a fish oil company, and I have what I would call myself today is probably a reluctant omnivore. Simply because I can't erase the knowledge that I have about the health of our oceans. And when I think about the fact that we've had a massive die off, not only of biodiversity on land, but also in our seas, then I start to think about something as simple as getting all of your omega 3s or trying to get all of your omega 3s from the ocean as inherently problematic. So before you began working to scale these operations at Vaxa Technologies and show that we could actually produce algae in both a sustainable way and growing it for specific nutrients and making sure that it would be as pristine as possible and also scalable without damaging marine ecosystems, without furthering the problems of overfishing and things along those lines, you were growing algae in open ponds. So I'd like to talk for a moment about what the differences are in these technologies and why perhaps you would shift from a more agricultural approach to growing algae to one that uses the benefits of technology.
It's a great question, Corina. So we've built and operated the largest open pond production system in the world. To learn a couple of interesting things. First of all, the motivation behind it was it looks simple and cost effective, right? Just a pond with a paddle, and what can be more simple than that? And of course, you want to have a cost-effective product, so that was the major motivation. What we learned along the years is a very problematic value proposition. I'll mention a few of the topics. One of them is biocontamination, right? If you have an open system, and these are large-scale, huge ponds, you can never really control the microbiological population. Okay, the wind blows, algae and microbes. The bird flies over and drops something. A wild boar jumps in the water. Okay? You can never really control your population. More than that, there's a natural sedimentation. The flow in an open pond is a laminar flow. It's a very slow flow, and the algae are a bit heavier than the water. So over time, they kind of settle to the bottom. You don't see it from the outside. From the outside, it looks green and beautiful. Only when you empty the pond, you see this layer of disgusting, like rotten algae on the bottom. Okay,
Mm.
and a lot of the weird algae taste that we feel when we kind of try algae-based product is basically that taste. So the organoleptic properties were not that amazing. In addition, because you're a farmer, actually, you have a seasonality issues. So if omega-3 is your product, you might have a 3 to 4x difference in the composition of omega-3 in your algae. It depends if it's winter, if it's summer, if it's a hot day, if it's a cold day. It's very hard to have a real industry-based solution when you're all over the place. And then I would say the last nail in this coffin was the techno-economical equation. So remember, we're growing algae not for the sake of biomass. We're growing them for a specific nutrient in them, which is omega-3. So you have to extract the omega-3 out. The algae itself is not bioavailable. You have to take the oil piece out of it.
Mhm.
So if you want to get to marketable concentration of omega-3, if your concentration is very low to start with, you have to go through 4 to 5 extraction and concentration steps. Each one of those is a cost center.
Mhm.
Each one of those has yields, so you're losing some of the oil in the way. In the end of the day, it's a very expensive proposition for an omega-3. In the case of Vaxa, for example, you control all growth conditions. The composition of the omega-3 in the algae is super high. It's an order of magnitude higher than in the pond. So then you don't need all these million extraction steps. One extraction step with the grass solvent is enough to get perfect, basically oil composition without these losses along the way. So in the end of the day, it looks like a cheap algae production platform in an open pond, which it might be, but not a really amazing, omega-3 production platform.
Well, you're speaking to some of my knowledge, which also comes from background in fish oil, and you see some of the same problems there, right? You harness the fish from the ocean. You have to, separate the fish body from the oil. You then have to refine it to remove toxins that are inborn and present in our oceans, and that the fish bioaccumulate along with the omega-3s that they're getting from the
Correct.
algae they consume, right? And
Correct.
so that's an expensive process. And then that oil is, lower potency. So they then work to concentrate that. And in this whole concentration process to get an omega-3 that is ready for the shelf in the market, you're going through several steps. You're also breaking bonds so that the oil could move from its more natural form to a less natural one. And then you have to go through an additional enzymatic process to put it back in a more natural form. But even so, you end up with let's say, a reesterified triglyceride is the nomenclature. I know it sounds all tech, but it's tech.
No, it is. It is. Basically, I can sum it up. It's processed food,
Hmm.
Corina.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just processed food versus a whole food. So what we're trying to do, we're just taking all the oil components out, and that's it. It's a basket of nutrition. The reason there's no toxic elements in it, because algae are not cultivated in any toxic environment. They're cultivated in pristine Icelandic water. So you don't have to take out the toxic. It's a whole different mindset. Okay, if your starting point is natural and clean and healthy, you don't have to go through, down this road of altering the chemical composition and processing your food. It reminds me of a National Geographic article that was talking about a fish they caught off the shores of New York, and they analyzed it for for drugs, actually, for pharmaceuticals. And the basically the outcome was, if you have a headache, you don't have to buy Tylenol, just eat the fish. Tylenol is included. If you don't want to be pregnant, you don't have to buy the pills, just eat a fish. It has everything. It has psychiatric drugs, everything in, because the fish is like a sponge. It just accumulates whatever's in the water, and some of it is not something you want to eat.
Well, if you think about it, like we, as a being here on the planet, we breathe air and we ingest in a way the pollutants that are present in the air and we bioaccumulate those. Fish breathe the water through their gills. And so they bioaccumulate things that even just come in through their gills, much the way we would in our lungs, because those
Correct.
organs are developed to absorb oxygen from the water or from the atmosphere. And along with that, we get the junk that comes with it. And it's no real surprise. It is alarming. And then
Correct.
what's different about
It's just a mirror of the ocean situation. It's a mirror that enhances
Mhm.
the situation in the oceans, but this is it. What you see is kind of a magnifying glass of the water quality in the oceans.
Now, if we were, let's say, growing algae in open ponds, we would be subject to some of the same challenges you mentioned earlier, other infiltration of other algae species, pollutants that are present in rainwater and in the air itself. And then even for something like, let's say, feeding the algae CO2. You bubble things into an open pond, a lot of it escapes into the air, right? So it's not going to be a
Yes.
one-to-one going to make that
No,
CO2 into
no,
oxygen. So
correct. And actually, you make a very important point, Corina. Algae can only digest dissolved CO2. And if you bubble gases into water, it's all about the residence time. How much time is the gas spending in the water in order to be dissolved in the water?
mm,
And in an open pond, which is about what 20, 30 centimeter deep, there's not enough residence time
mm.
of the gas in the water to have significant dissolution. So you're right. Most of the CO2 you bubble in just goes out. So there's no real benefit in terms of carbon uptake.
So when we talk about something like the oils that we're using from Vaxa Technologies and Orlo Nutrition's products and making a claim to them actually having a carbon neutral or carbon negative profile, this helps to explain some of that because it's a closed system, because we're bubbling the CO2 through, because the CO2 stays within that arena and isn't necessarily just escaping into the atmosphere. Now, I understand recently a study out of the University of Cambridge was published in the journal Marine Biotechnology that showcases the carbon neutrality or even carbon negativity of specifically Vaxa Technologies plant in Iceland, growing algae for human nutrition and also for fish, aquaculture. So I'd love for you to talk to me about this peer-reviewed study. What does it say about the future and about scaling this type of operation?
So first of all, it was a really interesting study. It was done, as you mentioned, by Cambridge University with the MATIS, the Icelandic Food Research Institute, and DTI, the Danish Food Research Institute. And they kind of they did something called life cycle analysis. They measured the total carbon footprint of the Vaxa facility in Iceland. And because we're using geothermal energy as an energy source, which is very light on its carbon footprint. And because we're recycling the carbon, the natural carbon emissions in an efficient way to kind of milk the carbon out of the gas phase over and over again, the bottom line was that this is a carbon negative operation. Corina, I don't know of any agricultural activity that's carbon negative. It was a big surprise for me, a happy surprise, but it was fascinating to see that. It really made us all feel that we made the right choice of cultivating algae in a integration with the geothermal power plant in Iceland. What it means is two big things. Okay, one big thing is the life cycle analysis. The second one is a nutritional equivalence that they did to the algae strains we cultivate in Iceland to beef. Okay, so I'll mention what beef means. Beef is not something that looks like meat, Corina. I can make plastic look like meat. It's not meat. Meat is has many three nutritional values that are hard to replace with other nutritional ingredients. One of them is essential amino acids. These are the protein building blocks that our body cannot synthesize on its own. You have to have it from an external source. The second one is iron, bioavailable iron, an iron that your body can really absorb. A lack of iron could lead to anemia and tiredness and a lot of things you don't experience. Beef is a wonderful source for bioavailable iron. And the third is vitamin B12, a bioavailable form of vitamin B12. So if you're going to cut dramatically on your meat, these are the three things you're going to be lacking. So they looked at those three things and the algae we cultivate. They then concluded that there's a nutritional equivalence. Now, why it's such a big deal? Because every ton of beef is associated with 100 tons of CO2 emissions. I repeat the number because the number is amazing. Every ton of beef is associated with 100 tons of CO2 emissions.
Did you say every
Why?
pound or every ton of beef?
Every
So is
ton,
it
every ton.
okay?
It's a 100x ratio between beef and CO2. emissions. The reason is the gases that the cow releases and the energy, mainly the energy associated with the feed production of the cow. Okay, so you put both of them together, that's the math. So let's say, for being conservative, that the algae production in Iceland is carbon neutral. If you can replace beef with that algae, for every ton of algae that's equivalent to 1 ton of beef, you just saved 100 tons of CO2 going to the atmosphere.
Sorry, before you
Okay,
move on, I want to talk for a moment about why it's so imperative that we talk about the vitamin B12 and iron, specifically because so many vegans are also deficient in these core nutrients because the iron present in
Exactly.
things like beets can be hard to assimilate into your body. So when you talk about the bioavailability of the iron
Yeah,
or the
yeah,
bioavailability of the vitamin B12, vegans are notoriously low
yeah,
in these
yeah,
particular nutrients. And so it
yeah.
becomes very, very challenging to find those sources from a natural, bioidentical source that your body can easily assimilate. The vitamin B12 that, as in most vitamins out there, is synthetic. And there are some
Correct.
people who have a hard time assimilating that vitamin B12 for that
Yeah,
reason. So let's
yeah.
talk
So
about these
yeah,
particular micronutrients that are vital for
yeah,
things like your bone health, your immune system health, antioxidative power. Yes, I want to know more.
yeah. Okay, so actually, it's a great question. So uh, one of my daughters was vegetarian for over 15 years, and when the doctor saw her iron levels and B12 levels, he was surprised she's still alive. It was so low, and she was
Mhm.
tired most of the time. Her hair situation was not that great, and so I experienced this phenomena at home. The issue is, as you said, beef is a great source for those bioavailable iron and B12. It's not that all of them are the same, okay? But an interesting study shows that iron from spirulina is 6.5 times more bioavailable than iron from beef, okay?
Incredible.
And now comes the big news, okay? In regular spirulina that's cultivated using sunlight, the B12 is not bioavailable. It's even called pseudo B12. It actually absorbs to your receptors of B12 in the body, but it doesn't function as B12. It's more damage than help. Okay.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, in the spirulina cultivated in Iceland with controlled light, and I wish I can tell you why that's the case, but it's just the way that the plant metabolism creates B12. Uh, the B12 form of the spirulina is something called methylcobalamin. Methylcobalamin is the most bioavailable form of B12 in nature. Okay, so on both of those levels, we have an excellent source, and it's unique to the cultivation method in Iceland. Okay, so
Wow.
only the spirulina from Iceland could call for this equivalence to beef. It's very unusual. It was surprising to us as well. But it's not the first time that we've seen that. You cultivate algae in different light conditions. The algae activate different metabolic pathways, and then they create different molecules that they do not create when they're exposed to solar light.
Hmm.
Okay, we've seen that with other anti-inflammatory things that algae can produce, and it's all based on unique growth conditions. But the good news is, if in Iceland we control those growth conditions. It's not a theoretical knowledge. So we know which light combination, which light intensity, which light and dark cycles, which temperature, and then we apply it. Okay, so it's an applied knowledge. If you had this knowledge and you have an open pond, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Nothing. There's no way to apply it. So
Mhm.
controllability gives not only the confidence of composition, gives a new kind of molecules produced by the algae. And as you know, spirulina is approved for human consumption. There's no regulatory barrier. In our case, it doesn't even stink. I described before what happened in an open pond when some of the algae settle. Then a lot of people they talk about spirulina as they close their nose and say spirulina, just because it stinks a little bit. So none of that. And we've made an experiment. We had a yogurt enriched with spirulina, uh, enough to trigger claims of source of B12 and source of iron on the yogurt, and we gave people to try it with closed eyes, and they couldn't feel the difference of which is which.
Hmm.
The fact that you're gonna eat a nutritional food doesn't mean that you have to suffer. Okay, it's actually the opposite. It's a pleasant user experience.
To your point, I had some early samples of some of the concentrate from our spirulina, and I was able to make blue frosting for my kids' cupcakes. And they loved it. And they had no flavor of spirulina. They were just this kind of periwinkle blue. And I'm sure I used enough to get to some of those claims as well. But this is something we're also now using in our immunity boost product at Orlo for the immune enhancing benefits of this particular spirulina, this ultra spirulina, as we call it, with vitamin D3 in an aqueous solution. So it's more bioavailable, and also a smattering of B vitamins, including that vitamin B12 methylcobalamin. And so, when I look at a formulation like this, I think about two things. One, people need some protection for their immune system. It's nice to give it in the mouth. You just spray a couple of sprays of the immunity boost, just like this, and you're done. It's bright blue, which is kind of surprising in a way because people who have grown up perhaps using spirulina in their smoothies are used to it having kind of a green color. So why do you think
Right.
this difference exists
Um,
specifically in our spirulina, or in that produced at Vaxa Technologies and used in the Orlo product?
Actually, controlling the growth conditions, mainly light conditions. Uh, as I mentioned before, they trigger different metabolic pathways, and the algae that we cultivate in Iceland has an extreme amount of blue antioxidant, which is called phycocyanin. It's allowed to be used as food colorant, by the way, so there's nothing bad about it. It's FDA approved, but yeah, it's very rich, and this presence is very interesting. So I gave a talk the other day, and I ended my talk at I told them, listen, the user experience is very important, and I had a glass of milk with a spirulina, so it looked very blue. It looked like a sky blue paint or something. And I said, you must be wondering how this tastes like, so you're all invited to taste it. And I had little cups of like different thing, and people just could not believe, because when it's blue, it's kind of almost like unnatural. You're not used to eating blue food, so your mouth is looking for this weird taste. You're expecting something weird, but there is none. So it's a typical face of what's going on. Oh my God! Like, I've seen this face a million times, of like the surprise that it actually has no taste.
So, as you talk to me specifically about this ultra spirulina, how is it that this particular strain, or what we're able to grow in this photobioreactor, feeding it only the light that it wants and needs to thrive, the nutrients that it needs, the CO2, and all of this carbon negative process? How is it different in its immune enhancing support benefit to other spirulina that might be out there?
I will tell you that generally speaking, in the algae technology world, or algae biology world, what we know is the tip of the iceberg. In many cases, it's like a black box. We know how we change the growth conditions, and we know the outcome. We honestly don't know exactly which metabolic pathways are switched on and off. Okay,
Mm,
a closed system with controlled environment gives you the opportunity for this learning curve. It's a multi-dimensional world of optimization, Corinna. So it's not like, for example, you have a certain amount of light composition, light intensity, temperature, and then you play with the pH, and then you find an interesting pH that gives you interesting composition or growth rate. Now you want to measure the light, it's only true in this pH. If
mm.
if if you want to, okay, so it's the multidimensional optimization, is it can drive a normal person crazy. So we're fortunate to have a very advanced technology that allows us to do that, and it's a black box approach. We just make some changes and we measure the output. And sometimes it's nonlinear. You just made a little change and the reaction is dramatic. So what we did, we got a European Union grant to look for anti-inflammatory activity. And again, always we compare it to open pond spirulina. That's our control group. And we have found a set of cultivation conditions that exhibit an enormous anti-inflammatory activity. And actually, it was in a very small dosage. So the idea to make a spray out of it, you can only get very small dosage through the mouth. It's a very efficient way of getting things into your bloodstream. You don't have to go through the digestion system. But it's only true if you need a very small amount of active ingredient. You cannot eat a steak through your under the tongue, right? So so because that was the founding, because we found that actually the optimal activity, anti-inflammatory activity, was actually very small dosage, that triggered the idea to use an oral spray as a vehicle to introduce it to your body.
Well, I personally have used it every day, and now my kids also come to me in my office and ask for some because that's where I keep it. If I kept it upstairs, I think they just drink it, frankly.
Yeah,
But
and
as
again,
it's
it's made as a friendly user experience. You're doing something good to your body. You're
Mhm,
strengthening your immune system, but you don't suffer doing this. That's the
right,
point. It's not something
exactly.
weird or disgusting at all. Yeah.
I love it. Now, a running theme through our conversation thus far has been about how some of the nutrients that we're seeing in algae strains grown using the unique technology of Vaxa and being able to really hyper control the environment yields ultimately an end product that is much more bioavailable, more absorbable, and that you therefore might need less of to get the benefit. So I'd like to take that lens and look a little bit more closely at what we're doing in the space of omega 3s. Now, we've discussed this a couple of times on the show, talking about how polar lipids specifically are more bioavailable than other types of non-polar oils that are so widespread across the United States. And really, most of the people who consume omega 3s take fish oil or algae sources that are non-polar, typically triglyceride, ethyl ester, or even free fatty acids. So tell us a little bit more about what the science shows and also connect to how that we're able to preserve that polar lipid form in extraction since they seem to not be able to do that from fish oil or other algae sources.
So first of all, you're absolutely right. The bioavailability is the name of the game. I would even give an extreme example of that. Some algae cells are completely non-digestible. People call them anti-nutrients. Why anti-nutrients? Because not only they do not absorb, they absorb nutrients from your digestion system on the way out. So not only not contributing, actually stripping you off from. So bioavailability is the key to everything we do in supplementation. I totally agree, and you can see that with vitamins, with calcium, in many examples. And many times the same active ingredient exists in many forms, but there's a very big difference in bioavailability between those forms. So if you think about oil and water, most people will tell you oil and water separate, which is very true in the case of fish oil or algae oil. Polar lipids, though, are different. Polar lipids, once introduced to water, they create like small, tiny droplets. Okay, and they keep the suspension. So there's no two layers you can see. It's actually one kind of cloudy mix. And why is that important? Because in the end, think about the stomach and think about a glass of water representing your stomach, and you add some water in it, and if the oil floats on top, that's where you get the fishy burps. And most people stop using omega 3s because of this user experience. You end up having no friends because of the fishy burp. So it's kind of not a funny topic actually. You want people to have good user experience, and so no fishy burps, and you want to swallow something swallowable. Okay, you don't want to swallow an elephant every morning. An efficient dosage helps. So in the case of that specific algae we chose, the natural way that this specific algae, it's called Nanocoropsis, is producing its omega 3s is in a polar lipid form. And actually, a polar lipid could be two different groups. The polar group could be either sugar-based or could be phosphorus-based. Okay, so this algae has both. We had to develop a whole new analytical system to measure it because you cannot find it anywhere else in nature. So there was a huge analytical effort even to be able to measure those molecules. And then their bioavailability was a question mark because those molecules, especially the sugar-based polar lipids, were never tested clinically. So it was a very good question. Would they enhance absorption or not? So the good news is that they are. It was measured in Germany on third party. It was measuring blood levels, omega-3 blood levels in healthy volunteers, and we could see the high bioavailability. I would say the unusually high bioavailability. And the key was to preserve the natural structure while you extract. So many times, if you use hexane or any other solvents, they're not only a bit toxic, or you need to remove them completely from the final product. So they're not on a GRAS list, okay? A GRAS means it has no toxicity levels at all. They do not preserve the polarity. So the extraction step kind of it hurts the quality of the product. So we put a big effort in trying to see what kind of solvent we could use to take the oils out of the algae, and we found that ethanol is a very efficient way to do that, and it preserves the natural form of polar lipids. Okay, and you can clearly see it again when you mix it with water, the cloudiness. And then you measure blood levels, and it's definitely working. You can see the big difference. I would say the next step that we're embarking onto is actually a clinical study that's measuring something called omega-3 index. The difference between omega-3 index and just a blood level is omega-3 index is measuring the omega-3s on the membrane of the blood cells. So it's an indication of tissue absorption, not only of blood levels, because bioavailability mean two things: is how the active ingredient go from your digestion system to your blood. That's number one. And then how it goes from your bloodstream to the organs of interest. That's a second step. So omega-3 index kind of captures both. It's a good indication for both, and we want to be able to. And again, it's easy to measure. You need one drop of blood. You don't need you can use an easy system to measure it, and you can see how your omega-3 index improves on yourself. So it gives you a lot of control, and I'm an engineer, so I like numbers. So this is a measurable improvement that you could do and see how your situation improves yourself. Okay, so we really like this idea, and we're in the process of getting this up and running, clinical study. By the way, the clinical study is going to measure another thing, which is sexual health in both men and women, which is a bit unusual, so I have to explain. With men, it's more intuitive because omega-3 has a slight blood thinning effect, and it might help with that. But one of the studies that, especially with EPA levels, showed a very strong antidepressant activity, so mood improvement. Okay, and I think that your sexual health is a mirror of your physical and mental health. Okay, if you're aching in any of both, I don't think your sex life is great. Okay, so I think this is a very nice way to improve both a little, and then help people enjoy life in all dimensions. So it's interesting. It's the same study, by the way. We're going to measure omega-3 index and your sex health, and we'll see. I'll let
Well,
you know.
I know too that omega-3s are positively associated with better sperm count in men. And honestly, it seems to be positively correlated with fertility in both men and women from research that's been going on for decades. So it would make sense to me that it also would have an effect of impacting your life in another way, perhaps from that pleasure
Correct.
center. So
Correct.
it's
Correct.
fantastic. So if I'm hearing you correctly, really then because polar lipids are so much more absorbable and they get into our tissues better, so into those blood cell walls, it's not really that surprising to me when you tell me something like glycolipids could be even more absorbable because humans are really good at absorbing sugar and fat. It's
Correct.
one thing
Yes,
that
you're
we're
right.
very good at, right?
Correct. Yeah, definitely.
So it seems like it's further just kind of deepening our understanding of how our metabolic systems work. And if we're able to turn this on and get more of those omega 3s into our cell walls, we also need to think about this axis that I just investigated in another episode with Melanie Plourde who was investigating your lipid to brain and liver connection. So essentially understanding that when you absorb an omega-3, and if you have better absorption of it and it's actually able to get to the tissues in your brain, that there seems to be a connection long term with other sorts of late stage diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia and the development of these diseases, because we might have had inborn insufficiency for a long, long time. And then you're not getting enough of these nutrients. Half the fat in your brain and eyes is made up of DHA. If you're able to absorb these nutrients and get them to the right place, be it the EPA or the DHA, then it seems that it would follow that your chances of developing these diseases that seem to be on the rise in our current world, that that these two stories seem to be connected, is I think what I'm getting to. Why might that be? Like, why might we be facing this situation?
Look, it's all about balanced nutrition, and I think what happened in the last 100 years, we're eating more and more processed foods,
Mm.
especially in the West. So what we see, I think, in a lot of these cases, it's just again a mirror of nutrition that's not balanced, and it's taking its toll. It's building up; those deficiencies are being built up over time, and it's a very delicate system. So I think that's what we see. So I think if you look at, you think about Mediterranean diet and people living longer and better quality of life, there is a connection between nutrition and health. Okay, it's well established. I think the more you go into something that's consistent quality, something that is more clean with less toxic things in it, something that's closer to the source, the better you're off. Basically, the key to health is not swallowing a lot of drugs every day. I don't think that's a good way. I think effective, balanced nutrition is a wonderful way to go. And again, the one of the reasons I'm so excited about this polar lipids is it's enabled people to bring omega-3 to their lives, because they don't need to swallow an elephant and they don't have a fishy burp. So it could become part of their life. They don't have to suffer doing so. Okay,
Right.
so again, the user experience is very important. I don't think people should suffer for a balanced nutrition.
I completely agree. So I'm just holding up for the camera 2 soft gels. These are 500 milligrams each. They're very small. They're not the honkin' fish oil pills that you're used to. And in the omega-3 formula, you get a balance of the two EPA and DHA. It's a direct source of those two things in the polar lipid form. And ultimately, this would be equivalent to taking 2 fairly concentrated, high potency fish oil large pills. So
Correct.
I'm wondering, personally, how much do you take every day?
Yeah. So I'll tell you how I do the math. Okay. So there's no official recommended allowance for EPA and DHA. Different health organization kind of give you what they think would be necessary to maintain an overall health, and the numbers vary between 250 to 750 of omega-3 EPA and DHA per day. That's kind of the range. So because polar lipids, and in our case, the unique polar lipids in nanochloropsis, they give us about a 3x advantage over fish oil. So what I do is I take a total of 250 milligrams a day. So it puts me, the multiplication by 3 puts me in a very good place in
Mhm.
this range. So if you take 250, which is equivalent to a fish-based 750, you're kind of well within, and it's basically 2 pills a day. Not a big deal. They're small, and that's what I do.
Well, for the rest of the audience here, I'll share what I take because I've been in the omega-3 space for a long, long time. And I am presently taking our DHA formula, but for 2 reasons. It delivers slightly more combined EPA and DHA, but I also am of the ApoE4 genome type. I have 1 representation of ApoE4. And having 1 representation of ApoE4, you're at increased risk for dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and all of these other brain health specific challenges that you could run into later in life. And through my conversation with Melanie Plourde, that researcher from the Université de Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada, she shared with me offline that the research that she's doing is actually sharing that people that are of the ApoE4 genome type may actually have a harder time assimilating the omega-3s into their brain tissues, and that could be one of the reasons that those that are in this ApoE4 allele that have that representation, 1 or 2, I only have one, so I'm at lesser risk. So therefore, I have said I need to double down on my DHA. And
Yeah,
so I take 2 of that every day, which delivers 350 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA, putting me over about that 1 gram EPA DHA combined, but also
cool.
understanding that because I have this particular allele representation, I'm at an increased risk for these later
Correct.
diseases, that are related to brain health. So I think
Correct.
it's really important as we look at our own health in the day to day. Most people are going to benefit from 250 milligrams of a polar lipid form EPA DHA combined. That's kind of balanced, so it supports their heart health, their joint health, their pain receptors, their mood health, and also their brain health. Like really checks all of these boxes. And other individuals might want to front load more that DHA specifically for the types of challenges I just shared. So,
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. So I think that the numbers I mentioned before, the 250 to 750, this is kind of a general health. It's
mhm.
for no like so if you have a particular reason, for example, high cholesterol or other things you really want to be more aggressive on management, then you might increase the dose. I totally agree. It makes a lot of sense to me, Corina.
Yeah. And the other piece that I like to recommend to people too is to look at your whole diet because to your earlier point, we've fallen out of balance. We have so much omega-6 in our diets that we aren't aware. If we think things like, "Oh, well, I don't eat fried food and I'm not eating a lot of red meat, so I'm not getting a ton of omega-6." Well, look at your salad dressing. Most salad dressings that are offered in the marketplace are they might even say olive oil on the front or avocado oil, but in the ingredients list, along with things like high fructose corn syrup, you might also see corn oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, canola oil, all of which are very high in omega 6 and completely deplete of omega 3s. And they do
Right.
that actually to ensure their shelf stability. So, the message that I like to send home to people is if you're looking to get all of the benefits of your omega 3 supplement, I mean, it's great as an additive tool, but if you also look at your consumption of omega 6s and work to bring that down, you're going to realize the benefit much, much more quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I had a long conversation with a medical researcher, and he claims that this ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, which changed dramatically in the last 50 years in our diet,
Mhm,
uh, which is actually inflammatory,
mhm.
kind of brings that's behind a lot of the things we see in human health. A lot of the challenges are a higher inflammatory level, and that's it. The key, you're absolutely, the key is the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio and bringing this to a good place. So it's not only increasing the omega-3, it's reducing the omega-6. I totally agree.
100%. Wow. Well, Isaac, I have to say, this has been such an interesting conversation. I love digging into the science with you. So, I want to, for a moment, offer you the floor as you can share a little bit about what you think is coming next. Is it algae cultivation in space? Are we living on the moon
Hmm.
or Mars and space stations?
Yeah.
You know, how what do you
Yeah,
see in the
actually,
future?
right, right. So actually, if you think about algae in space, it's not such a bad idea because it's a very efficient way to create oxygen and food for people in kind of far away, small systems, and you have to be very efficient in your resources, etc. But I think we can really learn a lot about life on this planet. That's what happened to me. This accelerated my thought about trying to deal with issues on this planet. And one of the biggest changes I hope to see coming is that algae would be more and more part of our food stuff, not only supplementation. So algae as an ingredient could be, your pizza dough could be with some algae ingredient in it, and your rice could be blue, right, or from blue spirulina, and you can have amazing food experiences, and you can bring nutrition through enrich your nutrition with algae components. I think that could be interesting and a cool experience. Um, I think we need to rethink about the way we produce food. As I mentioned before, Corinna, I think we just got used to living like pigs.
Mm.
I don't think we can continue producing our food stuff the way we did in the last few hundred years. But as humans, we're kind of used to evolutionary steps, right? So we've made one revolution, going from hunter gatherers to farmers. In the aquaculture, by the way, this whole evolution happened in the last 50 years.
Mm.
50 years ago, most of the fish were caught wild, and now most of the fish are cultivated. So in a short period of time,
I mean, even
and
tuna,
I think
and people don't know that.
yeah, even tuna, yeah.
Mhm,
Most of the fish on our plates, the majority are cultivated in
mhm.
aquaculture. So I think it's time to take the next step and think about how we convert clean energy and to cool nutrition foods in a very efficient environmental way. So it's just one more step. And when especially you talk to the young generation that they've seen, the internet revolution and like changing things is like not they're not afraid of this. They're not bound by traditional food necessarily. They're happily jumping on a blue yogurt and they think it's cool. So
Mhm.
I have a lot of hope actually regarding the acceptance of these kind of weird foods on our plate.
Well, there are many people working on the fringes to do just that. I just returned not too long ago from Natural Products Expo East in Philadelphia, and there was an entire panel on using seaweed in foods. The
Yeah, yeah,
founder of Atlantic Seaweed Farms, Bree, taken the stage, and she said in the next few years she could see a future where all 16 aisles of a standard sized grocery store would contain products on the shelf that had some form of algae in them, and be it something like spirulina or even seaweed, and seaweed as a component of a burger or a chip instead of your traditional, corn chips that you might get with your dinner, which are super high
I
in omega
totally agree.
6s and things
I
along those
I
lines,
totally agree.
so that we're getting to more novel food approaches. And I think that it's interesting to see there's been so much work on kind of cultivating new meat types that are perhaps fermented or out of even from thin air. There's a company called Air Protein, as for example, that's off in Walnut Creek, trying to create, well, proteins from thin air using
Yeah,
microbe
yeah.
technology. I
But
mean,
remember, Corinna, what we said in the beginning. We all we eat is light.
yeah, all we eat
Photos,
is light.
whatever, however
Mhm.
you want to turn it around. Okay, in the
Right.
end of the day, it's converting light into food. That's what
Light
we
into
do.
energy, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's light energy into chemical energy. It's an energy balance. So you can do fermentation and think, oh cool, we're converting sugar into whatever. Really? But how did you create sugar?
Yeah, the
It
sugar
was
came
growing
from
in
light. Mhm.
exactly. So no matter how you turn it around, the end of the day, it's an energy balance. And
Right.
I think we need to be very efficient in the energy balance. Where the usage of energy, the usage of fresh water, of land, these are finite resources, and I think the world is just starting to understand how finite these resources really are.
Wow. Well, I can't wait for the day that we are able to replace my standard protein shake with something from algae, because that's something I would jump on as I'm a bit into this whole algae space, let's just say. Now, I do want to make sure that I offer you the opportunity to share any closing thoughts before we wrap up today.
Yeah, so I think we're sitting in a very interesting time now because I think the world is ready for a change. I think people understand that the food plate is going to be different 30 years from now, and people understand the connection between food and health, and people want to know where the foods are coming from, and there's no like black curtain that the foods are made behind. They want to actually open the curtain and see.
Mhm.
uh, so I think it's a very good time to bring something to the table, literally, which is on one hand of high nutrition value, but on the other hand sustainable. Uh, I think especially the young generation, for them, it's like a must. I don't want to. You can't even start a discussion about nutrition value if it's been created in extremely unsustainable way. So actually, I think we're fortunate to be in this time. I think 30 years ago, people would not even understand what you're talking about. So we're fortunate to be here and to be able to bring this thing forward and to see these things accepted. Great times.
What a treat. Now, as discussed, I will be sure to include links to everything that we shared today with show notes, including that research from the University of Cambridge. I encourage everyone here to go on and check out Vaxa.life. That is the parent company for Orlo Nutrition. You can review directly on the site the photobioreactor that is ultimately growing the algae that we discussed today, specifically in Iceland, with a net neutral carbon neutrality, even carbon negativity, that has been third-party demonstrated through that research with University of Cambridge. I encourage you to also to follow us in social media at Orlo Nutrition, because we are going to be showcasing some behind the scenes peeks into the life of the scientists working there in Iceland to really create this new area of human and animal nutrition and be a part of the change that we all seek to build in this particular arena, feeding humanity and doing so while also helping to preserve our climate. While you're checking the show notes out, I encourage you to subscribe to the show on whatever your favorite platform is and tap on that 5-star rating. This will help more listeners discover the show so that people can enjoy the knowledge that we're sharing here and with it improve their health too. Thank you so much for joining me today. And one more note, if you're curious about the immunity boost with ultraspirulina and also the omega-3s, while you're visiting orlonutrition.com, you can qualify for an extra 10% off your cart checkout on your first order. Just use the coupon code NWC10 at checkout and you'll receive that additional 10% off. We're presently running a holiday bundle as well, which will enable you to get our omega-3 DHA or prenatal DHA along with the immunity boost at a dramatically reduced 27% off. So it's a great time to try. You'll also receive free shipping on that order. And who knows, you could even give that gift of a healthy treat this holiday season. As I close today's episode, I hope that you'll raise a cup with me as I say my parting words. Here's to your health.
Thanks for listening to Nutrition Without Compromise. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to learn more, visit orlonutrition.com and join our mailing list. You'll gain access to complete show notes, features, and informative blogs, because nutrition shouldn't be an either-or.